I'm Tammy Kolda, an applied mathematician, and this is Unlocking LaTeX Graphics. On this channel, I present tutorials on using TikZ and PGF plots. The videos on this channel are based on my book, Unlocking LaTeX Graphics, as well as some bonus materials. Today, I'm starting a two-part series where we recreate the famous transformer model architecture diagram from the Attention is All You Need paper. I include a link to the original paper in the LaTeX code and in the show notes. In part 1 today, we lay out all the nodes. In part 2, the next episode, we connect everything with arrows and add the background rectangles. The prequel was our episode on the yin-yang symbol, and we'll use the same technique to draw the positional encoding sinusoid symbols in the diagram. So if you haven't seen that one yet, I'll also link that in the show notes. Along the way today, we'll get to practice some skills we've already talked about in other episodes. I'll show how to trace over a faded reference image, how to build custom node styles with a color argument, and how to reuse the yin-yang style symbol I created in that other episode. One new element today is the node contents option, which lets us bake the text right into a style so we don't have to type it repeatedly. I'll explain that when we get to it. Let's get started. Here's our document setup. The diagram is tall, so I'm loading the geometry package and setting the top and bottom margins to 1/2 inch to give us the additional space we need. I'm loading parskip, which removes paragraph indentation. I'm loading hyperref, which I use to link the author name to this YouTube channel. The key package today is, as usual, TikZ. I'm also loading the TikZ positioning library, which we'll use to place nodes relative to one another. Before we draw anything, let's set up our color palette. I copied the hex codes for the colors straight out of the original figure using a color picker tool. Next, let's set up our general options using TikZ set. First, I set the node font to large and sans serif. This is an approximate match to the original diagram. Then I define a style called plain for the unboxed text, like the inputs and outputs. It scales the text by 10% because that's a slightly better match to the original figure. We set the alignment to center to allow for line breaks. I'm temporarily adding a draw option in there so that I can see the node edges while I work. The style common is the template for every colored node that has an outline. It draws a 2-point border with rounded corners, and those rounded corners have the rounding set to 3-point. It sets the X inner separation to 0 because the X width is controlled by the text width. The Y inner separation is set to 0.6 EX. The text is centered, again to allow for line breaks. The text width is set to 3.1 centimeters, so all the nodes are exactly the same width. The common style takes the fill color as an argument, denoted as #1. I covered styles that take an argument like this in more detail in an earlier episode, and I'll link it in the show notes. I just pasted some code here. The first thing I'm going to do is lay down a grid, and then I'm creating a node with the original graphic, and I've set the opacity to 0.5. That's going to make it a faded version in the background, and we can trace over that. When I compile this, our image appears, and that's what we'll be tracing over today to try to make our own version in TikZ. I'm also including at the bottom a link to the original paper. The graphic I'm displaying here that we're going to trace over comes directly from the archive source files for the paper. I've just pasted a bunch of nodes. I'm going to start at the bottom of the graphic. The inputs node is a plain text node, and it's the only node that I'm going to give an absolute coordinate to. This is just for convenience so that it aligns with the placement of that original graphic. Once I take away the original figure and the grid, this exact placement is irrelevant because everything else will be positioned relative to this first node. The outputs is a plain text node, is positioned relative to the input node, 2.6 centimeters to the right. Just below outputs, I add the shifted right text scaled down slightly. Let me compile this so you can see the results. Observe that the tops of these plain text nodes align with the start of the arrows in the original graphic that I'm drawing over here. Showing the node outlines enables me to check that as I'm getting things set up. Above these two are the two embedding nodes placed relative to these plain text nodes. These are the first filled nodes using the common style, and I'm passing in the color embed to control the coloring of those. And I put them both at the same height above the other nodes. When I created the common style, I did trial and error to try to make those styles match pretty well the original figure. The text inside the node is split across 2 lines, and I use a / to get the line break, and then I do a little bit of vertical adjustment to control the line spacing. I could have just set a universal line spacing, but it's a little different in every node, so I just go ahead and hand tune it each time. Now you can see this with the original figure, and let me turn off the original figure, and you can see what we have so far. So we have those few nodes there. I covered relative positioning and line breaks inside of nodes in earlier episodes, and I'll link those in the show notes. The nodes above these two nodes are small circles with plus marks inside of them. First, I go to the top and add a new style called plus to the TikZ set. It makes a circle node with a heavy border and a bold font and a slightly negative inner separation so that the circle hugs the plus sign tightly. Again, this is something I arrived at by trial and error. Then I go down here to the drawing itself and I'll add those two plus nodes. Then they'll appear 5 millimeters above the original. If I go back up here and show the original figure, we see those circles do not quite align with one another. I'm going to add a little line here temporarily just to show that if I start on the left edge of the plus and draw all the way over, the two circles that I have drawn are on a straight line and aligned with each other. So let me turn this off. Next to each circle, the original figure has a little sinusoid symbol for the positioning encoding. Let me go back up and define a style for that. I showed how to create a similar yin-yang symbol in the last episode, and I'm using the same idea here. The style is called Sinusoid. It draws a circle node of a fixed size. The key here is that I use the path picture option to draw the sinusoid on top of the node using two circle half arcs. I encourage you to watch the previous episode on yin-yang symbols to see how the path picture and these arcs work. Now that I have that style, I can go back down into my image and add the two nodes for the sinusoid symbols on the left and the right. On the outside of the sinusoids, the original picture has plain text nodes that say positional encoding. In these nodes, I once again use some negative vertical adjustment to get the line spacing just right. Let's check the alignment with the original figure and see how everything looks so far. And that looks pretty good. So I'll turn that back off and we'll keep going, drawing the nodes on the left box. Now I'm going to start building the nodes on the left, calling them L1 through L4. The first is a multi-head attention node, which I'll name L1. We're using here the common equals MHA, so MHA is specifying the color. I'm just putting it 18 millimeters above that left plus. The add and norm node repeats several times throughout the figure, and its text is always the same. So this is where I can introduce the node contents option, which allows you to hardwire the node contents. So let me go back up here to my styles, and I'm going to add a special style called add norm. So I'm using the common style and setting the color to the add norm color. I'm now specifying that the node contents are add and norm. This means I don't have to actually give any contents below. I'm also specifying the Y shift so that I can place it directly on top of the previous node, and then the Y shift will control how far up it goes. This means I can adjust the vertical spacing of all the add and norm nodes from just one place. That node contents option means that the style itself supplies the words, so I never have to type them again. Now I can place my first add norm node right above the node L1. I specify here add norm above equals 0 millimeters of L1, and then I specify that the name is L2. The node contents option is a little bit brittle. In particular, you cannot name the node in the normal way of specifying its name in parentheses after the closing of the options. Instead, you have to use the option name inside the node options. You don't need anything at all after the node. No curly braces, no name, no anything. It is fine, however, to put an empty pair of curly braces if you want. That actually will not change the node contents. The left group's third node is the feed forward block. And just like the add and norm, its text never changes. So I'll hard code that into a style as well. This time I'm not specifying how far above the prior node it is because that actually differs for its different uses. Then I go back down here and I can add the last two nodes in the left group, that feed forward node and another add and norm node. Let's turn on the original figure again for a moment so that we can see how things are lining up. I'd say that's lining up pretty well. Now let's work on the right group. I can paste all 6 nodes at once and we can compile that. If I go back up and turn on the original figure, we can see that that is also lining up very well with the original. The last 3 nodes sit on top of the right group and use styles we've already defined. So I can just paste them in and position them relative to the topmost node on that right stack, R6. And now we have our last 3 nodes. We still have the original figure on so that you can see that all the nodes lined up pretty well. Now I'll turn that off so you can see what state we're in at this point. We have all our nodes placed except for the 2 n times nodes that go on the outside of the blocks, and we'll draw those in the next episode after we get our surrounding blocks set up. I hope you enjoyed today's episode on laying out the nodes in the transformer model architecture diagram. We reuse skills for node styles and relative placement. And we learned a new trick of specifying the node contents inside a node's style definition. In the next episode, we'll connect everything with arrows and add the background rectangles and missing text outside of those. You can see that those arrows will be a bit tricky to draw with lots of bends and a few offshoots. I include a link to the document I created today in the show notes. If you found this helpful or interesting, please click like or subscribe. If you have TikZ or PGF plots questions, please post them in the comments. If you want to learn more, please check out the other videos. I also have a book, Unlocking LaTeX Graphics, available for purchase at major book retailers. Thanks for watching.